Hi, there are lots of cross currents in our public discourse today. One of the most troubling ones is the civic stains that beset us as a nation. Today, how can we confront the civic stains that face us, and how can we gain strength from doing so? Hi, I'm Rich Harwood. Welcome to another episode of Harwood Half Hour. We're recording this from our downtown studios in Bethesda, Maryland. Glad you could join me for another episode. Shoot me a text or a message letting me know that you can hear me and where you're dialing in from today. And here's a question for you to think about as we're going through today's episode. What civic stains do you believe we need to address in the country today? What civic stains do you believe we need to confront in the country today? Let me set up today's episode. It'll be a little different than ones I've been doing in the past, where I usually lay out some really clear prescriptions about how you can take action on a challenge that we face together. And today I'll lay out some steps that you can take, but more importantly, what I really want to do is lay out three ways in which we can address the underlying fears that I believe we need to confront if, in fact, we can together confront the civic stains that face us. So a little different today. I want to lay out three steps you can take that really get at the fears, I think, that are preventing us from doing the work that we need to do together. In a recent Sunday letter that I sent out that you may have seen just this past Sunday, I started by telling a story that we heard when we were interviewing someone for a project recently. This gentleman said to us that he was a mentor to three young Black kids who at the time were 12 years old. And he took them to an ice cream store in a part of town that these three boys had never been to, a part of town that they actually had never really seen. And when they were standing, the four of them, the mentor and the three young boys, when they were standing in this ice cream store, one of the kids turned to the mentor and said, "You sure it's cool that we're around all these white people? Think about it. These are 12-year-old boys in an ice cream store, maybe on a Sunday afternoon, enjoying themselves, hopefully enjoying themselves. And what comes to their mind is not the ice cream cone they're going to order or the flavor that they want or the fact that they're with two other buddies who are also 12 years old. But what comes to mind is this penetrating, piercing, for me, deeply troubling question. You sure it's cool that we're around all these white people?" And the mentor said that when he was with these three kids, he said you could feel that they were so nervous when they got there, when they walked into that ice cream store. Now, the story that the mentor told us during this interview was 10 years old. And yet it came to his mind immediately when we were talking about education issues and issues about children in the town in which he lives. It was etched in stone in his mind. If you think about it, it was etched into his mind. And he still remembered it. It still came to the forefront of his thinking when we were talking about these topics. And what I wonder about is these three 12-year-old boys who were 12 at the time, who are now, I take it, 22 years old, what they still think about, how they still think about standing in that ice cream store. I'm sure they still remember it. And even maybe more importantly, when you have deeply troubling experiences like that, that those experiences, the feelings become embodied within you. They become part of your very being. They become part of your bones, right? They become part of your physical sensations in your life. And when you come across other experiences like that in your life, it's not just an emotional response, it's a response that is embodied within you that you feel. It's a physical response. And there's lots of psychological literature about that. And so today, what I think about is, what does it mean to address the civic stains that we face, that these three young boys faced when they were in that ice cream store. That was a response not simply about today, but also about the past for them. And as one person wrote me back after my Sunday letter this past weekend, he said, you know, for those three boys, or for anyone who's African American, or in fact, anyone who's American, this issue is not simply about slavery. It's about what happened after slavery as well, right? It's about the Jim Crow laws that came about after Reconstruction, or in response to Reconstruction after the Civil War. It's about the debates that we continue to have in our country over Confederate statues, and the feelings and sensations that people have when they see those Confederate statues, when those statues still loom over the communities in which so many people live. It's what happened recently to the governor of Virginia, where this picture from his medical school yearbook came to the forefront, where one was wearing a Klansman hood and the other in the picture was wearing blackface. And not only where that came up for him, but then the Attorney General of Virginia had to face similar challenges or charges about wearing blackface as a young man. It's about law enforcement and the fact that so many people of color have died at the hands of law enforcement, or have faced abuse at the hands of law enforcement, and about the mistrust that exists in so many communities with the very people who are charged to protect us. It's about the systemic issues in education that continue, that these three young boys in the story I told a few moments ago faced in the community that we were talking about, and that the kids who have followed them continue to face in that town. It's about when I was in Montana recently, as part of my speaking tour, and where in that conversation, about 60 people, most of whom, I think all of whom, were librarians or worked in libraries, where the conversation turned to the issues faced by Native Americans today, and the plight that Native Americans faced when we founded this country, and the challenges that they still face today. There are other issues of civic stains in our country that are not the same as the original sins that we confront from slavery, the original sins from Native Americans. But these civic stains today are still troubling and still require our attention, right? The challenges that we face from our history with interning Japanese Americans during the war. As a Jew, I have faced, and we continue to face, anti-Semitism in this country. Muslims increasingly in our country now face discrimination, have seen as the other in our society. And these are more recent civic stains, but they're civic stains nonetheless. And whether we're talking about our original sins or the civic stains that came after those original sins, the more recent ones, or ones that have dogged us all throughout our history, it seems to me that so much of what we're talking about is whether or not we believe that every individual in our country should be afforded human dignity. That regardless of the color of your skin, regardless of where you're from, regardless of what your native language might be, regardless of how much money you have, regardless of the side of town that you live on, regardless of all of those things, do we believe that every individual should be afforded human dignity, and that human dignity is a birthright? It's not something that we earn because of our citizenship here in the U.S. It's not something we earn over time because someone affords us respect because we have some job or some title or some amount of money in our bank account. Human dignity, regardless of our station in life, is a birthright. It comes with birth. And it seems to me that this discussion about civic stains and whether or not we will confront them is about whether or not we believe that everyone should be afforded human dignity. And if we do believe that, then it seems to me we have no choice but to address some of these issues. Now, I also know that we're often afraid to address these issues, that there are embedded fears, ingrained fears in us, reflexive fears within us about addressing these. Some people I hear believe that if we open up these topics, if we open up these issues, if we seek to confront something as difficult as these civic stains, that it'll take our country somehow down the wrong path. There are others I hear who say that if we open up this can of worms, that we will further divide ourselves, our nation will further splinter apart, and we won't be able to move forward together. There are some who believe that if we seek to address these issues, that somehow they will unleash an anger in our country, a rage in our country, and that maybe lead to even greater prejudice, and that we won't be able to deal with the rage and the anger and the unleashed prejudice in some ways that we may confront. Now, I've spoken about these fears before, and I want to talk about them again today, but part of the challenge and part of the reason I believe we have these fears is because of the paths we have taken in trying to deal with the civic stains that we need to confront. You know, and I've talked about this on Harwood Half Hour before in terms of race reconciliation. I've written about it in these Sunday letters. And if you're interested, you should go back and take a look at those. But just to remind you of some of the things I've said before that I think are germane to this conversation. You know, sometimes when we decide that we're going to deal with these civic stains, all of a sudden someone gets the idea that, hey, let's create a quote unquote race commission to deal with these issues, or let's launch all these civic forums on race, and we'll get everyone together and talk about these issues. And in our desire to create progress, I think sometimes we get a little silly and get ahead of ourselves, and we look to ramp things up so quickly that we put more emphasis on scaling something. We put more emphasis on the numbers of people we get into these forums. We put more emphasis on the number of forums that we're going to do, as if somehow the quantifying of the forums and the number of people and how big our events are equals something effective, equals something of meaning and purpose. And what we forget along the way is that we need to actually create the right environment where we can have thoughtful conversations about the topics that we're going to address, that we need to open up spaces where people actually feel safe enough and good enough to speak their truth, where people feel as though we can work through these issues, where people feel as though there is room to engage with one another. And when misunderstandings arise, which they surely will arise, that there's room and time and space to deal with those misunderstandings, to deal with those misgivings, to deal with the mistakes and how we talk to one another sometimes, to deal with the harsh things that we sometimes say to one another when we're dealing with such tough issues. It seems to me that if we want to deal with our fears, then we've got to deal with them by opening up the right kinds of spaces. We have these fears, and when we have them, sometimes we say to folks, well, just be civil. We just need to have civil conversations. And I know when I say this, my friends who deal with civility are cringing now because they're like, well, Rich, don't say what you're about to say, but I'm going to say it anyway, which is that sometimes when we ask people to be civil, what we're really asking them to do is to not be emotional, to not be angry, to not raise the volume of their voice. And I ask you, if we're going to deal with civic stains, if you're Native American, if you're an African American, if you're a Muslim these days, dealing with the othering of you through the various debates that we have in our country right now, why would you be unemotional about it? Why would you not have really strong feelings about it? Why would you not cry about it? Why would you not weep about it? Why would you not feel some sense of rage about it? If we want to deal with these civic stains, I'm not saying that we should be disrespectful toward one another and we should push each other into a corner. Of course, we need to have conversations where we can see and hear one another. But I also believe that if we're going to deal with the fears that we have about these conversations and them taking us off on the wrong path, then we need to open up the space where people can actually express what they really feel and the emotions that they really hold, so that we can actually get to the issues we need to confront. And then another thing that we often do in trying to deal with these fears is that we create these comprehensive responses as if somehow we can, I don't know, get everyone in a room and list all the things that we need to do and then put them in sort of some 4-color report with saddle stitching on glossy paper and release it and say, okay, so we have our game plan for dealing with the civic stains in our country if we only follow all of these steps. And you and I both know that nothing ever happens that way. No change ever occurs that way. No change in America has ever happened really that way. Civil rights didn't happen that way. It happened in various steps taken over time, coming from lots of different directions. And it seems to me that instead of dreaming up these comprehensive plans to address these civic stains, we ought to move one step forward at a time and build our confidence and capabilities that we actually can create progress together. And so instead of taking these steps that we often take where we ramp things up too quickly, or we ask people to be civil about something that's highly emotional, or we create these comprehensive plans, why don't we try something different? And that's what I want to talk next about. What can you do? What can we do? How can you begin to address these challenges? How can we begin to confront these civic stains? What can you be thinking about as you make your way through your life and through your work and through your community on a daily basis? So, three ideas about how we can confront our civic stains and gain strength from it. And how can we do it, and how we can do it in a way that tempers or addresses our fears or makes us less fearful to actually take this on in a productive way. So here's the first thing. Number one, what if we were to acknowledge that such stains actually exist? What if we were to acknowledge that such stains actually exist? So here's what I mean by this. What I mean is, when these topics come up, when these issues come up, it means not recoiling, it means not stepping backwards. Instead, it means that we acknowledge them. But when I mean acknowledge, I don't mean just give a nod to them. And I definitely don't mean give a wink to them. But what I do mean is that we step forward and we see people. We step forward and we hear one another. We step forward to try to understand one another. We step forward to try to embrace the challenge that we face, that we claim some ownership, not that we necessarily were perpetrators of these challenges or that we were somehow engaged in them, although we might have been, but that we own them in a different way. We own them as Americans. We own them because we believe it's important that we acknowledge them and that we take some responsibility or some sense of obligation or some sense that it's worth it to own these together, because by owning them together, we might be able to make progress on them. That we own them because we believe in human dignity, and that we believe that everyone should be and must be afforded human dignity. We're doing 2 different projects in Mississippi right now on education. And I think about those 3 boys who were 12 years old, those 3 black kids who went to that ice cream shop with their mentor. And I think of them in my mind's eye, standing there in that ice cream shop, on the one hand, holding their ice cream cone, And on the other hand, worrying about what all those white folks are thinking about them being in that store. And what I think, in fact, what I think I know, is that for those three kids, or any kids, to believe that we have a shot at addressing our civic stains, it requires them to know that we acknowledge those civic stains, that we see them, that we hear those kids, that we know what they're experiencing, and that we care about it. So another way, if you want to think about what it means to acknowledge that these stains exist, is to have some affection for those kids, to have some affection for who they are, and to have some affection for who they can become. But they can become those things if we acknowledge these civic stains and own them and make something of them moving forward together. So that's number one. We can acknowledge, what if we acknowledge that these stains exist? Number two is this. What if we believed we can gain strength from engaging on these civic stains? So much of our fear is that something wrong will happen and that we will lose strength if we engage on these. But what if we actually began to believe that we could gain strength from engaging on these civic stains? And I happen to believe we will gain strength if we engage on these civic stains. As I've said before, to engage on them means that we have to recognize and acknowledge and bear witness to the pain, even the sorrow that people feel and hold about these challenges. And I believe that no matter who we are, no matter what we've experienced, no matter what part we have played in this or an experience in this, that there is pain and sorrow within us all when it comes to these challenges. But here's what I also know. It's not just about pain and sorrow. Think again about those three kids standing in that ice cream store holding their ice cream cone. What is it that they want from us? What is it that they need from us? What do these situations require of us? And what those three kids want to know, and what all kids want to know, and I think what all people want to know, is, will things get better? Will things get better? Can we make things better by taking action together? And so ultimately, this conversation requires that we not simply sit with the pain and sorrow and the rage and the discomfort that we feel from these civic stains, but that we actually pivot to create something together. That we actually pivot to create something together. That we actually become co-creators in the communities that we live in our country about what it is we can be and who we can become, right? And this is ultimately about where we want to go. And it seems to me that we can gain strength because, well, don't we all want to create something better for ourselves? Don't we all want to create something better for each other? This is what I hear from people wherever I go in the country. No matter who they are, whether they're African American or Native American or Hispanic or Jewish or Muslim or anyone. People from Eastern Kentucky, from Mississippi, from California, I hear the same thing over and over again. What they want to know is, how can we move out of the challenges we face and create something better? And how can we come together to create that? Because everyone knows, even if they don't want to admit it, that the country we need, the country that we all want, no matter where we're starting from, can't be created on our own by ourselves, that we're going to have to pull together to make this happen. And it seems to me that when we pull together to make things happen, we gain strength, because we begin to see that we actually have some capacity to act. We actually come to believe in ourselves again that we can create something together. We actually believe that we can transcend our differences and the boundary lines and the dividing lines that keep us apart from one another. We actually come to see that whether we're Republicans or Democrats, conservatives or liberals, despite our differences, and there are real differences, that despite those differences, we can still come together and create something together. We gain strength from that. And not only do we gain strength, we gain hope and a sense of possibility. And it seems to me that if there is something missing in our society today, it is a belief in ourselves that we can come together and create something better than what we have, and we can move to something we share together. We can do that by coming together to address these civic stains. We can gain strength. So if number one is that, what if we actually acknowledge that these civic stains exist? And if number two is, what if we believe we can gain strength from engaging on these civic stains? Number three is this: what if we could get closer to achieving our nation's ideals, America's ideals, by confronting our civic stains? Now, I know this may seem counterintuitive because for a lot of us, we may want to hide from these civic stains. We want to believe the story of America as we know it, which may or may not, often does not include these civic stains. And why tarnish? Why tarnish the story of America with stains? Except here's the thing. Here's the thing. I unabashedly believe that this is a great country. Some of you know, and I've written about that, when I give these speeches now on this speaking tour that I'm on, I wear a flag lapel on my suit because I believe that we need to express our love and patriotism for this country. Now, I say that and also know, and also say as quickly as I possibly can, that we have these civic stains on our civic fabric, that while we are a nation of ideals, we have not achieved those ideals, and we will never achieve those ideals. But I also know that we can move a heck of a lot closer to those ideals than we are today. And here's the other thing I know about America, and one of the reasons why I love this country so much, and I actually do believe that it's exceptional in many ways, that we, over the course of our history, have found ways repeatedly to recalibrate who we are and to correct the path that we're on and to find a better path and to move towards becoming a more perfect union in our imperfection. We abolished slavery. We enacted women's suffrage. We enacted child welfare laws. We enacted civil rights and voting rights. We have found ways over time to close achievement gaps in our schools. Over and over again, we have found ways to improve this country by combating diseases and doing all sorts of things. But here's the thing. We are called again to step forward and deal with the challenges that we face in order to make a better country and to create a more perfect union. And that by coming together, by stepping forward, we don't move farther away from America's ideals. We actually have the opportunity together to move closer to our ideals. And I don't know any American from any walk of life who would like to move farther away from our American ideals. I know that there is evil in the world. I know that there are people who will hold their prejudice and bigotry and hatred no matter what we do. But for the rest of us, the vast, vast majority of us, the question is, what are we going to do? And how do we put this country on still a better course than we're on today and get closer to our American ideals? So here's my hope for you today. Here's my hope for you today. Every day as I travel this country, I meet Americans from every walk of life, from every type of community, who want to bring out the best in us and the best of us, who believe that we can do better and that we can be better. And I share those beliefs with them. They believe that human dignity is a birthright and that we need to do a better job of affording every individual in our country human dignity. I suspect that you're one of those individuals, if you're listening to this episode, that you share these views or that you share these beliefs or that you at least want to move closer to them. So my hope is let's not step back out of fear or out of belief that we don't have the capacity to deal with these challenges. Rather, let's step forward together. Let's engage together. And let's remember that we can gain strength from engaging and confronting our civic stains as opposed to running from them. We can gain strength. And so thanks again for joining me for another episode of Harwood Half Hour. If you enjoyed this episode, if you found it thoughtful, provocative, if you believe that we need to deal with these challenges in our society, I urge you to share this episode with a friend and talk to them about it after you both have seen it, or at least after they've seen it. And in the meantime, thanks for joining me. Remember that this is our 30th anniversary this year at the Harwood Institute. Our work is rooted in the philosophy of civic faith and the practice of turning outward. On this 30th anniversary, we've recommitted ourselves to trying to find ways to support your good efforts in communities all across America and in the 40 countries that our work has spread to. If you want more information about the Institute or resources that you can use, go to our website, theharwoodinstitute.org. Until then, join us in 2 weeks for another episode of Harwood Half Hour, right here on Tuesday afternoon, 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And until then, be well. Thanks.